Friends, welcome back to our discussion about the Beatitudes. And wow, have they been just so powerful. And I think we're learning not just about the words that begin the Sermon on the Mount, but we're learning about the heart of Jesus. And that's really what we want to do. And that's what Jesus wanted us to do. So grab your Bibles, turn again to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to look at the 7th verse this time. This next Beatitude says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. One of my favorite quotes is from Mother Teresa, and it goes something like this: "Many people mistake our work for our vocation. Our vocation is Jesus." I want you to think about that for just a second. You'll read it in your study guides. Many people mistake our work as our vocation, and their work was important, as you know. They were taking care of literally the least of these in Calcutta. But she said, that is not our vocation. Our vocation, which is the combination of what we do and who we are, that is Jesus. And I've thought about that quote so many times, especially with this particular beatitude. I remember a story that my wife loves to tell about me going to some particular store, and I walk by and I see a woman sitting in her car, and she's obviously crying. And I walk about halfway from her car to the store, and I start to feel guilty, so I turn around and I come back and I knock on the window, and I said, she rolls down the window and she's obviously not doing well. And I said, "Ma'am, are you doing okay?" And that was kind of the dumbest question ever asked. She's sitting in her car crying, but I asked it anyway. And she said, "I'm fine." Well, you know, in our world, the phrase "fine," "I'm fine," means obviously I'm not fine, but you've asked the question anyway. So I asked it again. I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes, I'm fine." And we did this 2 more times. It was just sort of like a little scripted interchange. And I happened to have a Kleenex in my pocket that had not been used. And so I took out the Kleenex and I handed it to her. And I said, "I hope you have a better rest of the day." And I walked on into the store. Well, I get home that night and I'm telling my wife and my daughters about this interchange. And I'm feeling pretty good about myself because I helped give a Kleenex to this woman who's crying in her car. And at the end of it, my wife looked at me and said, "Let me see if I get this straight. You saw a woman that was crying. You ask her 4 times this silly question if she's okay, and all you do is hand her a Kleenex?" I said, "Yes, I thought that was pretty good." And she said, "You never asked if she wanted to talk or if there was anything you could do?" And at that moment, I could see the alarms go off. I knew that something was going to make me feel bad about what I thought was a pretty good day. And what ended up happening is my wife said, "You know, I don't mean to make you feel bad, but all you were was a glorified tissue dispenser." Well, when I think about what many of us and how many of us read "Blessed are the merciful," I think many of us think that mercy in this particular passage only means having a feeling or some type of emotional response to something that makes us feel compassion instead of actually acting on the compassion. The word that is used here is the Greek word elimon. And elimon means literally to go beyond sympathy. Now, if you take the word sympathy, if you take half of it, it means to basically to imitate, and it means into the difficult sections of life. So your sympathy is to imitate into the difficult sections of life. Well, if it means to go beyond imitating into the difficult sections of life, what I believe mercy in this word elimon really means is to enter in to a person's ongoing journey in life. Think about what Jesus did for us in the incarnation. Now, the incarnation is a big fancy word that means the divine became human. That's what happened at Christmas. But the incarnation is the best example of elimon that I know. In fact, the writer of Hebrews in chapter 2, verse 17, basically says that the reason that Jesus is able to be our high priest and to be able to advocate for us before the Father is because of elimon, because he stepped into our circumstances. The incarnation, God becoming human through Jesus, was God showing mercy at the highest and yet deepest forms of compassion. Not just feeling that something ought to be done, but then doing something about it. And isn't that the greatness of the gospel? that God looked down and knew. I mean, it didn't take a lot of investigation to figure out that we were in trouble. And then God decided to do something about it, Elimah. He decided to step into our situation. I'm a big buff of history, and any time I will travel around, I'll try to figure out what is happening in that particular local area. One of my best friends, who's also the producer of this particular series, he and I went to a small town in Mississippi, and we did some history of the Mississippi River. And I learned about the flood of 1927, which was a devastating flood. And in this particular small Mississippi town, there was a story about Elizabeth and Maxine. Now, what was interesting is that Elizabeth and Maxine actually are buried not feet from each other. They were considered to be closer than sisters, but yet they came from two very different worlds. Elizabeth was born to the plantation owner. She was the person who, through her father, she inherited all of this land. She was the one who employed all the staff. She was the head of the house. Her husband was the one who ran the plantation, basically. Her ancestors had actually been slaves in that particular area, but her family had not done any better economically. And so they came from two very different worlds. But Maxine's husband worked for Elizabeth's husband. And when the 1927 flood happened, everyone was worried as they knew the river was rising about the break of the levee around the small town where they were. So Elizabeth's husband and Maxine's husband went off together to help put up sandbags and to help repair some of the breaches that they found in the local levee. Well, the story went something like this. The levee broke. They would find Elizabeth's husband and Maxine's husband's bodies not feet from each other, but they were more than 2 miles down the river, and both, of course, were dead. After the death of their husbands, the whole community changed. In fact, the 1927 flood of that area redid a lot of the cultural and a lot of the normative ways that communities did business in that area. It also helped such things as the Ku Klux Klan and racism and segregation to become even stronger. And it was because the resources were sucked out of that area and people became afraid of not having enough. And so Elizabeth and Maxine, who came from two very different worlds, should have never become friends and never been connected. And yet, in their great losses, they discovered each other as friends. Elizabeth eventually asked Maxine and her children to move into her large house. And that's where Maxine and her children would live. Her children would grow up along with Elizabeth's children. Of course, people would talk about it. And there was a group that had been designated from the community to come talk to Elizabeth about the rumors and the innuendo that was going around about Maxine's family living with her. Oh, did I mention that in the flood that Maxine's home was completely devastated and done away with? So Elizabeth was trying to deal with more than just have compassion because Maxine had lost her husband too, but because her whole home, her life was gone. And so the group showed up and they said, you know, it's okay to be friends with those of different classes than you, but this is a little unseemly. So Elizabeth stood up and said, I know you think you've come here as friends and being sympathetic to a particular issue, but all you've done is you've made injustice the heart of who you are. Maxine and our families are more than just friends. We've been related by something even deeper and more intense than blood. We've been related through compassion and through loss. Think about that for a second. Because they showed mercy to each other, they received mercy. Because they reached out to each other, they were able to share this journey of life together, and it made a difference. Two women from very different places who learned how to step in to each other's lives and experience it. Now, I want to read a passage to you from the book of Amos, Amos chapter 5, verses 23 through 24. It says, "Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." In that particular passage, what Amos is trying to describe for the people is that God has said, I don't want to hear the platitudes. I don't want to hear the simple artistic responses. I don't need poetry at this moment. What God wanted was real responses to the things that were really going on in his people's lives. He said, I don't want you to be distracted by these things. I want you to be focused on these things, righteousness, and I want you to be focused on each other. What would it mean in our world if we truly could live as those who were merciful? Well, we would change the worlds of others if we were to step into their lives and live faithfully. But we too would also be affected. It says, blessed are those who are merciful, for they will receive mercy. I like to think of this conversation as about real, authentic mercy. You know, the word that's used here for mercy is a word that's more than just having a feeling about the needs of the world. It's about having an active response of compassion to the needs of the world. So maybe, just maybe, this beatitude should be read something like this. Blessed are those who take the time to know each other at the most intimate, deepest levels, for they will be fully known too. The incarnation was God's way of showing us how to step up. And just as God sent his Son that we may be fully known, we too are called to reach out to each other. Go to your reflection guides. Think about the places where you invest yourself. And think about those ways that you would want people to know you.